Visiting with us in the Hyundai Texans radio studio, Executive VP and GM Nick Caserio. Nick, how's it going?
Fellas, good to be here.
We're recovering in a good way from a wild afternoon at NRG Stadium and a lot of prep this week for a very tough opponent, Cincinnati. But let's start with the review on what happened against the Buccaneers and what was going through your mind as all that is transpiring in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, probably didn't have as much fun as you had in the radio call. But, there were a lot of things in that game. I think the big thing was, at halftime, the realization was it was a one-score game. So despite how poorly things had gone in the first half for a myriad of reasons, it was a one-score game. So if we could just put ourselves in a position to keep it competitive and give ourselves a shot into the fourth quarter, then it would have been similar to some of the other games that we've been in this season. So they scored. Went up 20-10. We were scored, had the whole kicking situation, went for two. So we were sort of back in the game. And then really the end of the game, the fourth quarter, was kind of back and forth. So the big thing with the field goal there was the idea was to get points on the board. I mean, Frank and D'Amico talked about it. It was kind of unorthodox or out-of-the-box thinking. But nonetheless, getting points in that situation, there's kind of a line of demarcation about when we might attempt a field goal because points will be at a premium. So kick the field goal, go up 3, they get the ball back, go down the field and score, and we get the ball back, and good 2-minute execution by everybody involved. So a lot of our games have come down to the last possession. That was another good example. So we're fortunate to come out with the victory. It was good execution, by a lot of people involved.
Nick, you've been around and seen some things. Had you seen that happen before? Had that happened at any point, whether you're the Patriots? Because I know it has happened since it's been here, where you've lost a kicker during the game, and how did you handle it at that point?
Not quite to that extent. I mean, the kicker is so specific because you only bring 3 specialists to the game, right. So you really have one of those people. You have contingencies in place. You have a backup. Maybe in practice you'll simulate who's the backup snapper, let him get a few snaps. So if you're in that situation, doesn't happen often. So you just have to be able to adjust and adapt as you go. So it puts a little bit of tax on the offense when you get down there because typically going to the game with, 3 or 4 2-point plays and you're going to use them in certain situations to score differential. But when you're down there and to use it, let's say just about on every scoring possession, puts a little stress. But, credit to the offensive staff for being creative and adjusting and adapting and the players going out there and making plays.
Yep. I know we have a lot to get to, but you were in New England for the Flutie drop kick, right? And that came up. A lot of people asked us, well, why can't Cameron Johnston drop kick it? Easier said than done, right? And how do the rules play into that?
Yeah, it's not as easy. I mean, Doug was a phenomenal athlete. I mean, Doug could do a lot of different things, and it's something he actually had played around with a little bit, in practice. So whether or not we actually need to do it or not, but there are some dynamics that are involved. And I'd say the extra point has moved from where it is, where it was then to where it is now. Yep. So essentially you're attempting a short field goal, as opposed to just an extra point. The reason they moved the extra point back was because there was, 99.9% make rate. So you move it back a little bit. So the placement a little bit deeper, conditions, weather can be a factor. So it takes a little bit more execution. The percentage is still fairly high at that, call it extra point or field goal kicking, but the rules are a little bit different. I'm not sure we're going to see that anytime soon on the drop kick, but it's just not as easy. I'd say punting is a very specialized skill or task. You see some punters that also handle kickoff duties. Mitch Wisnowski does it in San Francisco. Jake Bailey did it in New England for us. He's done it, I think, for Miami. So it's you have to practice it. Some are a little bit more equipped to handle it than others. And then place kicking is place kicking. So that's a very specific skill. So those things happen, and it doesn't happen often, but just have to adjust and adapt as you go.
Nick, one of the things, if you're paying attention to this team, that it's done really well is handle end-of-half, end-of-game situations pretty well. I think there was a stretch of like 3 or 4 games where they were kicking a field goal on the last play of the half or just with virtually no time left. 46 seconds, 2 timeouts. As you're looking at that situation, what are your overall thoughts? And then obviously how it came out. What was the key in getting all the way down, getting a touchdown?
Yeah, those end-of-half, end-of-game, it's certain strategy involved. So you need to practice. You need to understand the philosophy of what you're trying to accomplish. Make sure everybody understands where are we headed on this. What's the goal? What are we trying to accomplish? And those are things that D'Amico and the staff discuss, I would say, rigorously during the course of the week so you're prepared. So when you get in that situation, you can react accordingly. So how you use your timeouts, when to use the timeouts, what's the score of the game. End of half is certainly one situation. End of game is another situation. So they may be similar. It could be different depending on where you are in the game. But it's practice, it's strategy, it's making sure the players understand. I would say there's a couple other things involved too, sometimes offensively and defensively. There's a simplification of the calls. So I don't want to say there's a repetitive nature to the calls, but a lot carry over. So you're doing them week after week after week, so you get a comfort level. Quarterback has certain plays that he's comfortable with. I'd say most quarterbacks, if you ask them in a 2-minute situation, they know what the calls are going to be and they feel comfortable. You may ask for something specific. You may have a certain scheme play that maybe if they use a certain coverage that not every team uses. So I don't want to say it's simplified, but there is a simplified nature to what goes on in that situation. Yep. So in the end, it comes down to execution and then how you handle the timeout and how much time is left on the clock. Those things are all a part of the dialogue.
So this is going to sound sort of strange, but with so many decisions having been made during the game and Dara is now kicking, was it almost a little bit better that you were down 4 instead of down 3? So you brought that decision made, well, do we want to kick it? How close do we want to get? Or is it better that you were down 4 that you knew it's got to go in the end zone?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know what the situation is, so you have to score a touchdown. So if you were going to kick a field goal, that could potentially change what you're trying to accomplish, whether or not we would have kicked the field goal or not. I mean, there's probably a good chance unless we got close enough, because you don't want to put the player in a position where you, quite frankly, know the result. Probably not going to go the way you hope. Probably where we kicked the field goal from with Dare there in the fourth quarter was about maximum range. So if we could get the ball down to that point, still it's all right. Do you give it a shot at the end zone? So there's certain calculus that goes into it. But in the end, we knew we had to score a touchdown. So let's try to move the ball down the field, get ourselves as many opportunities in the end zone as possible. And I'd say, again, credit to the offensive staff and the players for the execution. I mean, the whole situation, was handled well. The ball didn't hit the ground, really, until the end zone. So, that says a lot about your players.
Nick, a little over 3 months ago, you started training camp, and Scotty Quesenberry was your center, among others. A little over 3 months later, 4 centers later, we have Michael Dieter in there and a very smooth operation with C.J. Stroud. What does that say about the coaching and about C.J., just the whole thing working together, all the challenges you've had on the offensive line?
Yeah, it's really a credit to the players and the coaches that are involved. I think when you try to build the depth of your team, especially on the offensive line, that's why you train them at as many positions as possible. Some are a little bit more equipped to handle than others. We've talked about this on the show. Some guys are center only. Some guys are guard only. Some players can put their hand on the ball and play guard. So you're trying to create as much flexibility and versatility amongst a group as you can. I would say when you look at the players that we had going back to training camp, Q played center all last year. Q's probably a little bit center, more of a center than he is a guard. Juice was a center. He played guard. He'd done both at Penn State. Dieter had experience. He started, 40-some-odd games for Miami, played center, had experience at guard. JP was a little bit more guard than center. But you're trying to train those players because you take 8 linemen to the game. So typically 1 inside, 1 outside. The 8th is kind of an extra, so you get a bonus player. So if something happens at center, what are your options? You move the guard in, one of the guards inside to play center. You bring in somebody to play center. How do you allocate your resources? So there's a lot of time and effort that goes into it, and the player has to be able to execute the skill as well. So I think it just speaks to the players, their ability to just adjust and adapt to the circumstances, not feel sorry for ourselves. You never want to lose players. It's an unfortunate part of the game, but by the same token, it presents an opportunity for somebody else. So in those players that we had 4 or 5 guys that we felt could put their hand on the ball, which you'd rather have too many centers and too many players that could put their hand on the ball than not enough. And we even talked about Morrissey, but Jimmy has played in games, started games. So, 5, 6 guys that can put their hand on the ball, and it's an important skill. Obviously, the relationship between the quarterback and center is important. So there's a lot of work. That's why you rotate through. You work. This is going back to training camp. I think everybody kind of gets caught up in the groups, who's doing what with whom. But you want to try to get as many players, as much work as possible with as many people as possible. So if you are in a situation, the first time they're doing it is not in the game.
Yeah.
But can they kick field goals? That's what I want to know. Can you find a guard center that can kick field goals? I say it in jest, obviously. Nick, whenever in the offseason, everybody's like, well, they don't have a number 1 wide receiver. You got to have a number 1 wide receiver. You can't subsist without a number 1 wide receiver. Look at all the teams in the league. They got a number 1 wide receiver. I look at this group and I feel like there might be a number one wide receiver one week, another one the next week. I think so much put on that, and yet it feels like this group, it feels like the whole is greater maybe than the sum of its parts. What do you think about the receiver group? And in there, you got 3 pass catchers that ended up catching over 100 yards the other day. What do you kind of think about this group together?
Yeah, I think we felt going into the spring as we were putting the team together that they kind of had complementary skills. They were all skilled in their own way. There's certain things that Tank does well. There's certain things that Nico does well, that Noah brings to the table, that Woody brings to the table, even Metch, who hadn't played. So, and then Hutch kind of has, I'd say, certain things that he does well. So you're going to need, I would say, 3 to 4 receivers that are going to have to play significant offensive snaps. Typically, 1 through 4 are going to be your offensive players. So are they just outside-only players? Are they inside-only players? Do they have position flexibility? What do they bring to the table? And it's really you're trying to identify what do they do well, and then how the offensive staff calls a game, how Bobby calls a game. You're just trying to accentuate the skills of the players that are involved. But I think we felt good about the group. Obviously, we drafted a few of those players. We actively signed Woody. We went out and signed Noah. Those are players that we wanted on the team because we felt that they would potentially have a certain role in the offense. And you're going to have fits and starts throughout the course of the year. We didn't have Noah for 3 or 4 games there, so present an opportunity for somebody else. And I'd say Hutch is a young player who he's been able to get to the game because he's helped us in a kicking game. So, but when he gets the ball in his hands, he's done some things with the ball in his hands. So, at some point, you're going to need everybody. So, I mean, it's a credit to the players, it's a credit to the coaches, and I think Ben's done a great job with that group. But I think if you go back and look at D'Amico, myself, some of the other coaches, like we felt good about the people that were in the building. What that looks like on the outside or how people will interpret that, we certainly can't control that. But you just try to identify players that have certain traits or characteristics that you think can help your football team. And then when you bring them in, sort of let the competition sort itself out and let them identify what their roles are going to be.
All right, I'm stealing Johnny's thunder. Here it is.
This is a highlight of
I am done with this interview.
The Bengals, as good as any team in the league right now. Nick, your thoughts on Cincinnati?
Yeah, I mean, really a great football team. Just when you look at the organization, what they've done, it kind of starts at the top with, Mike Brown. Obviously, the Brown family carries a lot of weight. And what they've done. But since Zach has taken over, I mean, Zach has been there now for I forget how many years, but they had some struggles early on. But, they got a great coaching staff. I mean, Zach's done a great job. Brian Callahan is offensive coordinator. Lou Anarumo, defensive coordinator, great coach. And Darren Simmons, who learned under Scott O'Brien. Darren's been with Cincinnati for 21, years. I think the individual probably didn't get a lot of credit. Not that he's looking for it, but Duke Tobin's done an unbelievable job, kind of his role behind the scenes. They've assembled a great team, and I think this is a good example of they've drafted really well, and you're starting to see that come to fruition. Look, a lot of their best players are players that they drafted, and they kind of developed, they invested, they were able to re-sign. So it's a good football team top to bottom, and they've improved from the start of the year. They were 1-3 or 0 whatever. Now they're 5-3. So it just speaks to just the arc and progression that you want to see. Offensively, everything starts with Joe. Joe's a great player. I mean, you're highest paid quarterback or highest paid player in the league for a reason. So very smart. He understands we're going to football. He's a great football player. They have really good skill. Jamar, I'd say Higgins is healthy. Tyler Boyd has a really good role inside the formation. Good back, and Joe. They've gotten good production from the tight ends. The offensive line, they have a certain profile and type that they've identified, and they've added some key players. They're a good example of have a core and then add in free agents as needed, which they did with Orlando when they signed him. So offensively, they present a lot of problems, and defensively, I mean, this is a very good scheme. They're very disciplined. They're very sound to make you earn it. Young and fast in the secondary. DJ Turner, I mean, fast as hell. I mean, like lightning fast. Taylor Britt is an ascending young player. I know he got hurt there against Buffalo. We'll see where he is. And then kind of like offensively with Boyd, I'd say Mike Hilton is probably one of the more underrated defenders in the league, even though he's just a slot corner. But very instinctive, very tough. He tackles, has a really good fit. They kind of turned the safety position over a little bit. They lost Jesse and Von Bell from last year, but Dax Hill, I think, is an emerging player. Drafted Battle in the 3rd round. So they're getting good production, from the safety position. Dax has, done a nice job. So, and in the front, I mean, this is a really good front 7. Very good pass rush. I mean, Hendrickson's, I think, among the lead leaders in sacks. So there's a good example, kind of, all right, offensively, they plugged Orlando in free agency, went out and signed Hendrickson, gave him a big contract. compliment him with Hubbard on the other side, who they drafted and extended. And then DJ Reader, who, everybody in Houston knows well. DJ's a really good football player. I think he's added a certain dimension to their inside of their defense. So him, BJ Hill, and they do a great job, I would say, coordinating the pass rush. They can pressure with 4. 2 good linebackers that they both drafted and re-signed, Logan Wilson and Pratt. So, it's a good football team. And in a kicking game, they drafted Charlie Jones. Charlie was hurt earlier in the year, but punt return for a touchdown. McPherson's a good kicker. So, it's a good football team, top to bottom. So they've assembled it. They're well coached. They got stability from top to bottom. So it's certainly going to present challenges for us on Sunday, but it'll be a good environment to go down or go up into and play.
Nick, facing a guy like Joe, a guy that doesn't run all the time, but when he runs in selected times, they're almost killers. Almost every scramble ends up being, God dang it, we had him, and he gets a first down, or he breaks out of a tackle. But then he's great with ball accuracy, et cetera. Why is Joe so difficult to stop now that he's healthy? Now he's got over the calf issue. Now that he's healthy, why is he so difficult to stop?
Yeah, I think you alluded to it. He has this sneaky athleticism and sneaky movement about him. He can make plays with his feet, so you want to try to keep him in the pocket. But he also is able to kind of, different than Baker, but similar, to kind of keep plays alive. I think the one thing about Joe, when you go back and watch him at LSU, his accuracy was one of his top traits. His accuracy and anticipation, I would say, was elite. And he's shown that now. So he's a really good decision maker. He doesn't give up the football typically. They're one of the least, I think, turnover teams, and they have one of the least amount of turnovers in the league. But he's very smart. He understands where to go with the football, plays with good anticipation. And if it's not there, he knows where to go with the football. I think they're second or third. It's snap to pass in terms of getting rid of the football. So he's not holding the football. So he's trying to anticipate. And they're kind of, what are you doing on defense to try to put themselves in a position to give themselves the best chance for success with the best plays. So, Joe does a lot of things really well. There's a reason that they rewarded him with the contract that they did.
All right, Nick, you're from Ohio. The Bengals were started by Paul Brown. Yeah. And we talk a lot about this offense even with the Shanahan system, but it goes back to Bill Walsh, right? Who goes back to Paul Brown in Cincinnati, correct?
Absolutely. The imprint that the Brown family has had on football is significant. And matter of fact, when you go to Ohio State, they're indoor. They have a banner with Paul Brown, because he was at Ohio State for a period, very successful, and then he went, Cleveland and Cincinnati. So his impact on football, just in general, is massive. And then I would say in the state of Ohio is significant. And then Mike is still there running the football team. Katie Blackburn has a big role within the front office, so it's part of the Brown family. So it's a very family-oriented, family-driven organization, and they had success with Marvin. Marvin was there for a long time, so they had a lot of stability, and they decided to make the change to bring Zach in. And Zach, I'd say his first couple of years were hard. They won 4 or 5 games. But, I think Zach's a really good coach, very bright, very good offensive mind, has a good system. He adjusts and adapts. So, they're really, I'd say, one of the top franchises, probably in our sport right now. So, when you look at it, how they've pieced it together and what they've done, there's certainly a lot that we can learn and, hopefully implement here in Houston.
Nick, it feels like one of the guys that doesn't get mentioned a lot when you talk about the Bengals, because you talk about a lot of stars and you talk about Zach Taylor. Lou Anarumo as a defensive coordinator, it feels like he's got his guys that kind of fit what he wants to do. How big of a challenge is it going against him and what he's been able to do with the group he has? Because up front, you mentioned Reader and you mentioned B.J. Hill. Teams are running the ball a little bit, but as far as getting to the quarterback, they get back there as well as anybody in the league. Why is Lou the right fit for them, and what does he kind of bring to it from their defense as a defensive play caller?
This is where stats can be a little bit misleading. I think they're one of the better red area teams in the league. They create turnovers. And Lou's a secondary coach. He's been a very successful secondary coach. He's a defensive backs coach going back to college and then worked his way through the NFL. But I'd say they are very disciplined. They're very consistent, but they kind of give you the illusion of complexity within simplicity. The guys are in the right spots. They tackle. They're very sound. They kind of make you earn it. And they have some different looks that you have to deal with, especially, on third down. So post-snap, you have to be able to adapt and adjust to what the defense is doing. But, Lou is very well respected in this league, and deservedly so, because he's done a great job, and he's put the team in a position. Again, when you top to bottom, offensively, defensively, kicking game, front office, they got a lot of good people, which is why they're having the success that they're having.
So is it going to be Skyline Chili or ribs at Montgomery Inn? I mean, what's it going to be for you, Nick?
It depends. I probably won't get down there too late. I might try to make my way to Ohio State for the game and then head down. So
those two sound like kryptonite to you.
Yeah.
Ribs at Montgomery Inn slathered in sauce and Skyline Chili with a pile of cheese and meat and onion. That just does. That sounds like kryptonite.
I'd say there's
to
a less than zero chance of probably either happening.
Is there a huge rivalry between the Cleveland area and the Cincinnati area? They don't really like each other, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because they're diametrically opposed.
Yeah.
One is far up north as you can be.
Yeah.
One. I mean, essentially, it's interesting. The stadium is almost in Kentucky.
Yeah.
I mean, it's right there
Across
on
the
the border.
river.
When you fly into the airport, it's actually in Kentucky,
Yep.
but it's considered Cincinnati. So, there's a lot of history that goes back and forth between Cleveland and Cincinnati, no question.
Nick, thanks a lot. Good luck this week.
Thanks, guys.